Started with our time of conversation with Paula. I hope you have questions. Oh, good. All right, Marilee, you can start. How this is going to work, I have questions too, but more we want to hear from you. Raise your hand if you have a question. I will come to you with the microphone so everyone can hear the question. Yes, and this is a directional mic, so you really do have to hold it right up here to be heard. So
most people can hear me really well. Hi. My question has to do with, my daughter lives in a small town in Kansas, my transgender daughter, and almost everyone there knows her by her chosen name. But there is a handful of people in our life, a couple of relatives and some friends that have known her since birth, that insist on referring to her by her dead name. Now, I have tried my very best to be supportive of her and I've talked myself blue in the face to these people to try to convince them, that what they're doing is harmful. But they just, well, it's against my religion. Yeah, really? Show me the chapter and verse. But what I want to know is, should I even be trying to interact with these people, or should I just let it go? That's really the question.
It depends on the circumstance. I think a good bit of the time it's better just to let it go. There are circumstances and people who can move the needle, and there are those who cannot. One thing, interestingly, you'll find that as a therapist, I don't work with trans people because of what we call countertransference. You end up with too many of your own issues getting in the way. But my former wife that I work with, she does. One of the things we're always interested in talking with trans people about is, why do you use the term dead name? Because in fact, it was you. And when you say a dead name is the name with which you were born, the name given you to at birth. And I find it's not particularly helpful in terms of creating continuity between your previous life and your existing life, because you are you all the way through. And so I was Paul, and Paul is still here. And I was always Paula, too. That's something that, again, like I said this morning, you've talked to one trans person, you've talked to one trans person. Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I want to ask you this about, thank you for just your courage, your bravery. You're so inspiring. I'm really grateful. I was thinking about, as you were growing up, you mentioned that at 4 or 5, that you realized that you were not what you appeared. And I was wondering, what were you aware of at that age? And then how did you navigate childhood and adolescence with your very conservative parents with that realization and awareness? And a second part of that, second question.
You're only allowed the first half.
Well, I've got so many questions. I'll come back to, okay.
No. Ask your second half.
The second question is, when you decided to transition, was there at that point in your life something that kind of finally inspired you to do that? And then how did your children react to that?
Hey, that's 3 questions.
That's right.
It's interesting. Historically, about 0.5% of the population has had gender dysphoria, which is the DSM-5 description of it. And we're seeing those numbers go from 0.5% up to 1%, 2%, sometimes even 5%. Those of us who are therapists want to follow the data. And we find that those who identify very early as transgender, pretty much their entire lives will identify as transgender. So when we're working with trans teens particularly, or really anybody any age, how old were you when you first identified as transgender? And if they say 4 or 5, then you can be pretty sure that they are in fact trans and will feel that way 30 years from now. If, on the other hand, they say 14 or 15, well, then we have a lot of questions. Because that's the segment of the population where we find significant numbers detransitioning. If you take a look at those of us who identify early, 92% of that group are very happy having transitioned. 92%. So let's isolate the 8%. What about the 8% that are not happy? And we find, again, out of this first group, the 8% who are not happy, 92% of those, so 92% of 8%, actually are happy in their new body. They just don't like the way the world has treated them. They've lost family, they've lost friends, they've lost jobs, they've lost money. And so it's not particularly happy. 4% of that group, between 4 and 8% of that group, so again, between 4 and 8% of 8%, so a very, very small group, are not happy with their body once they have transitioned. So that's a very, very small group. Today, when we look at detransitioning, and a new study just came out, and I'm so glad it was done by a trans man so that people can't say that was the right. It was just a therapist following, a scientist really following the data. We find that about 2/3 of those who detransition say, I probably wasn't trans in the first place. And almost all of those identified as trans for the first time between 13 and 19. So for therapists, that's always a question. We also tend to see some comorbidities. And the comorbidities tell us, which in therapy language is just more than one diagnosis. And we see, for instance, in trans women, and that's me, male to female as trans women, we see a comorbidity of ASD, autism spectrum disorder. With a lot of trans men, we see comorbidities with body dysmorphia, with eating disorders, and with complex trauma. And so when you see those comorbidities, you also really want to ask tough questions. Are we dealing with somebody who will identify as trans 5 years from now, or are they likely not? That this for them is something different. I was saying to Jen yesterday, there are times with some segments, particularly with teens, that as a therapist you find yourself saying, in the last generation, would you just have been goth, not trans or non-binary? And with those kids, I always say, let them call themselves whatever they want, let them dress however they want, let them just say whatever they want to say. Just do not treat them medically until at least 18. And really, most of the time, 22. Young people grow up slowly nowadays. And it used to be the World Professional Association of Transgender Health required that you be in therapy for a year before you could be on hormones, and that you live in your new gender for 2 years before any kind of surgery. That actually probably was pretty healthy. Why did they pull away from it? Because the far left demanded that they pull away from it. And so that was 2016 that pretty much happened. And so, I get in trouble for saying that. I have been canceled from the left and from the right. But when I met last year with about 300 primarily psychiatrists or pediatricians at UCLA, they all agreed with the numbers that I'm giving you, and they agreed with that approach. But I also made them turn off the recording at that point in time because we get pretty badly attacked from the left. And my interest as a therapist is following the data. What do they tell us? And I think we're going to find out 15 or 20 years from now that it's 0.5% of the population that are transgender, and most of those people knew it at 4 or 5 years of age. Yeah, it's a long answer to your question.
Yeah.
How did it affect my kids? Pick up my son's book. It's a really good one. She's my dad. We spoke about this. There's also a TED Talk with the two of us together. It was tough. It was really tough. It was toughest on Kathy, and we're still close. And but it's tough on the kids too. And honestly, it'll never be the same. We've all figured it out, and we're a very close family, but it'll never be the same. Families are gendered. My son and I were extremely close. as you become if you're Mets fans together, because you have a lot of disappointment in your life. But it's not the same. We went hiking, as I told you last night, we went hiking a year and a half ago in the Highlands of Scotland, particularly Isle of Skye. And so we were able to just talk through all of it. And it's still hard. It's hard for me, it's hard for them. With my grandkids, they're all between 15 and, I have 5 granddaughters between 15 and 18. And the 2 oldest, remember, when I was Paul, they all call me Grampaula, Grampaula. And to them, it's nothing. To my kids and their spouses, it's hard. That's the place that's the hardest, by far. And whenever I don't talk often with transgender people, because I don't find it particularly helpful to them, and that is not what I feel called to do as much. But I do speak with pastors who are considering transitioning, because I'm unique in being able to tell them what their experience is likely to be. And I actually generally say to them, don't do it. Unless you feel absolutely that you must, don't do it. And now to the third part of your question. For me, it was a calling. I was watching my favorite TV show of all time, Lost. If you were a Lost fan, we can talk till midnight about it. And yes, the final 2 hours were brilliant, not terrible, as many people think. But there came a time in the final season where the protagonist of the show, Jack, if you were a Lost fan, realizes he's been called by the God figure Jacob to die. And it's when, if you were a Lost fan, it's when he's sees the broken glass at the lighthouse and sees his home, his childhood home. And I just started sobbing because I knew I'd been called to transition. And I just cried till I fell asleep, and fell asleep right there on the floor, and woke up about 3 a.m. crying again. I think I would have survived had I not transitioned. It's interesting, my therapist and I both think I would have been okay. My best friend, who's also a therapist, and my former wife, who's also a therapist, they don't think I would have survived. Of course, all that's irrelevant because I did transition. But yeah, it's, and with Kathy and me, it's tough. It's hard. At the moment, we're living together for financial reasons, and that's not ideal. And we work together, that's fine. We're together with the grandkids all the time, and that's fine. And we travel together, we travel well together. We were married for a long time. But I'm dating again. She finds that very, very difficult. And so, it doesn't bother me when she dates. It bothers her when I do. And, this is kind of typical. When you're honest about it all, she says, 95% of me knows you're Paula, but 5% of me feels like you're Paul. And so when you are headed out the door to go see her, I'm like, well, you're stepping out on me, And I would rather have remained married. But, like our therapist said to us a long time ago, you guys have worked harder than 99% of people who are married, and you've gotten further than 99% of people. But the tragedy is you're a lesbian and she's not. So that kind of was that. So now I've answered all 3 of your questions.
Yeah, I'd like you to speak a little bit more about the difference between an ally and an apprentice, and what we can do, what you would like to see from those of us who want to do more than just be an ally.
Yeah. It is to work at our direction, and often the thing that we need more than anything else is what I get in the town I live in, which is a very wealthy foothills town in the Front Range of Colorado on the way to Rocky Mountain National Park, close to Boulder. And so when I was going to run for public office again, I was saying to our mayor and a couple of our city council members, I said, the atmosphere's changed. I don't know if I may not be elected. It's such a anti-trans climate. And I think 4 of us in the conversation, the mayor and our city administrator, and then 2 board members, all 4 of them said, damn, we always forget you're trans. That's what we want more than anything else. It never, ever, ever, ever comes up in town. You know, I was in a town board meeting a few weeks ago over affordable housing, and as you can imagine, people were furious. Well, they're all liberals, and they all want affordable housing, just not next to my neighborhood. And one woman was just livid, just livid, and she contacted me the next morning and apologized. And I said, well, let's get coffee, and we got coffee, and you know, it was great. And then I left town yesterday. So Friday, she texted and said, I just saw your TED Talk. I had no idea that you do that. Oh, I love it. As far as she was concerned, I'm just the mayor pro tem, and she was just pissed at me. More than anything else, we would like for the fact that we're trans to be incidental. And so the more you can treat it as incidental, the better that is for us. So that's the first thing I would say about that. The other is, depending on circumstances, it is always good to ask us. Because like I said at the beginning of my talk, and in my first TED Talk, you talk to one trans person, you've talked to one trans person. The thing that I think at this point is the most important in moving from ally to apprentice is to not be drawn in by either the right or the far left, but to be willing to take a look at the hard information, like the Cass report put out by the National Institutes of Health in England, which most people on the left will be very angry about. Most people on the right will say is wonderful. And the truth is that particular report follows the data. So it really doesn't matter if the people on the right think it's wonderful. It, in fact, is factual. And so it is something that, you know, I'm probably going to do another TED Talk, and they're talking about having Hillary Cass come in, and we do it as what they call a duet talk at TED. I said, you won't find a whole lot of disagreement between the 2 of us. I said, if you want to find disagreement, then get JK rolling. And, you know, if you want a more debate kind of atmosphere, I can do that. So that's actually who they're asking, and I'm fine if I end up debating her. She's been very anti-trans. So the thing that's most helpful is when you see things written, particularly in the New York Times or the Washington Post or the Atlantic, trust them. Because they are all really fair-minded on this, though you will find the far left will often be furious with the approach, particularly the New York Times takes, because they won't just, you know, fundamentalism is fundamentalism, wherever you find it. When your answer to data you don't like is just to scream louder, that's not help to anybody, whether you're from the right or from the far left. You know, I think reading good literature on it, there are probably 3 really good books from trans authors. I think they're probably the 3, well, I'd say 4. There are 4 really good biographies. Jenny Boylan's She's Not There. Jenny's a professor at Barnard College, part of Columbia University. She's great. Her book is fantastic. Deidre McCloskey, a world-renowned economist. Her book, Cross something or other, hers is very good. Joy Layden, who's a professor at Yeshiva University, Joy's is good. Mine also is one of the 3 best-selling, I think, memoirs on trans stuff. All of those are pretty fair-minded and pretty balanced, and will give you the personal story that we've had, but then also our experience. Right now, in being allies and apprentices, allies, I think mostly I see that as just, you know, doing what you were talking about. If a family is going to be rejecting, say, you know, just help me understand why you won't call them by this name, and saying, you know, because they'll say, well, it's religious, and then you can, well, it's actually not in the Bible. And then let it go at that, because it's not. in the Bible anywhere. If you want to be an apprentice, I think it's to do the additional work and then to be willing to be one of the people who says, yeah, actually, I've read pretty carefully on that, or I've talked to a nationally known trans woman on that, and this is actually what they say. Because we're not going to get there if we're not following the data. My own conviction is we're not going to get there. I think we get there primarily through proximity and narrative, through being in the same room and hearing each other's stories. Indulge me for a moment. It took us 150 years to outlaw slavery, and it's a mess. It took us 25 years to get to marriage equality. How did we get there? Jonathan Haidt, a brilliant book, The Righteous Mind, says people do change their minds, but not unless information comes to them in a non-threatening way. Always remember that. Debates change nobody's mind, ever. So what happened on gay issues? Well, Norman Lear started it with All in the Family in the 1970s, positively presenting information, bringing it to you in a non-threatening way. What's less threatening than long-form comedy coming into your own home in the living room? From there, you went to the scripted Ellen show, where the protagonist comes out as a gay woman, not the talk show, the scripted show. Again, a story coming into your own home. From there, you come to Will and Grace, where the two stars are Will and Grace, and the showrunners gave them those names because they wanted to focus on the two issues of Will, the gay man, and Grace, the cis woman. From Will and Grace, you go to Modern Family, where one of three storylines is gay, to today, where people are incidentally gay, because we're there. The culture has shifted on that issue because it came into our homes in a story form, in a way that anyone could accept. And we can thank Norman Lear for that. I have a life rights deal, which I know sounds Faustian, but I have a life rights deal with a Hollywood production company. They want to do a 3-year, 30-show story on my life. All of it's arced out. The first year is, they've got the outline done. The first show is written, but they're not going to get it funded, not in today's world. So, I mean, if they get it funded, I'll be shocked. I don't think, it could have happened, I signed the deal 5 years ago. Could have happened then, but it's not going to happen now. So it's, and I get paid a hell of a lot of money to go to universities all over the world. I'll go to Christian universities pro bono, because if I can get in there and get in front of them, then the kids see, oh, she's relatively as normal or as abnormal as I am. Oh, okay, that's it. That's when you win. And yes, you had a question here.
Thank you. I just needed two things. I'll ask you the second one later. I just wondered if you're willing to share with us, what did this do with your sexuality through time?
Oh yeah, that's a really good question. One of the few that I generally don't answer, not because it's private. But yeah, it's pretty, I think that is one of the real realities, is when you finally experience intimacy in the right body. It's like, oh, okay, well, that's quite a confirmation of this. So my son and I were invited to the TED Summit at Edinburgh 5 years ago. And they asked, I think 8 of us we were all TED speakers, and they asked us to give a 6-minute talk on the subject you would not ever want recorded. It was so much fun. And it was just for the speakers. There were like 90 people there. And I gave the talk on experiencing sex as a female, experiencing sex as a male, and the differences between the two, which I would not ever want recorded. I did write about it a good bit in my book, one of the later chapters. The whole book's pretty transparent, but that chapter defines it pretty well, yeah. She's not there, and the other two, I don't remember the name. It's Deidre McCloskey, MC, capital C-L-O-S-K-E-Y, and Joy Ladin, L-A-D-I-N. Those are the, and then My book consistently comes up actually above everybody's except, in terms of sales, everybody's except Jenny Boylan's. Hers is a bestseller. As a woman. Yeah, it's easy to find. Simon & Schuster. So it's pretty much anywhere. I believe you were next over on that side.
Along with our youth director here, I am a member of PFLAG to show them support. And it is amazing to me the number of parents, it's not so much about gay or lesbian issues or non-binary issues. The children, we have so many parents with children 5, 6 years old, just as you described, you know. And the biggest thing I am seeing is when one parent can deal with it and the other cannot accept it. And the environment was a bit different, like you said, a couple of years ago. We were on a different path. We're fortunate we live in the bubble, so to speak. But it has been just very, very hard to listen to them dealing with what they're seeing on TV, exactly what you talked about when you were going, oh, whoa, this president is out to lunch, so to speak, and the harm it is causing. I try to be as positive as I can. I've told them in 77 years, I've seen a lot. I worked in a medical supply place where people were becoming transgender 50 years ago. It was kind of a new thing. Surgeons were figuring some things out. You don't do this for the fun of it. Some of these things went terribly wrong, but the crying need to be the proper gender you feel you were was so strong. All I can do is tell them that that is such a strong thing, you have to go with it, you know, because I've seen it. But any advice on how to keep myself a little bit calmer when I'm dealing with the non-accepting person?
I think it's what I said a few minutes ago. People do change their minds, but not unless information comes to them in a non-threatening way. So it just doesn't do any good. And when it's a couple disagreeing over a child, that's actually work for their marriage therapist. And probably need to let it be there. As opposed to, the group I'm most concerned about are the kids 5, 6, 7 years old. You know, like our principal in town, his child, his wife's a therapist in town. That child's first phrase was, "Mommy, I a girl." And those kids need treatment quickly. And really, you can do medical treatment for them on 12, 13, and it's really utterly fine. We know who those people are. They're not difficult to identify. They're the ones who need treatment as teens, and they're the ones who are getting screwed right now with all the laws being passed. So, yeah, I think back there, yeah.
Thank you for answering all these questions. My name is Roy, and I was really interested in what you talked about, the data, and also looking to like the New York Times and other sources of accurate information. And I came across an editorial in June in the New York Times by Andrew Sullivan, and you maybe read it. He was an early advocate for gay marriage, and his editorial's titled "How the Gay Rights Movement Radicalized and Lost Its Way." And he kind of says that when it became radicalized by the far left, they kind of ignored people's sensibilities and aggressively went after this agenda-driven approach that backfired, and it went from where a majority of Americans supported basic rights for trans people to the opposite. And I was wondering how if you agree with him at all, or how you feel about that whole topic.
You know, I mean, he makes a living as a gadfly, but I like it, Sullivan, a lot. I like his stuff. And yes, that was, I think, a very good and very accurate editorial. And it's a terrible concern of mine. My former wife right now has got 5 teens who identify as transgender or non-binary, and 1 adult. And she came out and said to me this week one night about one particular client. She said, I actually think they're trans. And we're both surprised because most of the time she's coming out saying, yeah, it's the comorbidities speaking here. And so we just need to, to work through this until they're able to figure these things out. And we're terrified, particularly with a lot of those identified male at birth who have ASD and significant autism spectrum disorder, because they also do not have the EQ to know how the world is going to treat them. And so working with them, it's really, really tough. And she just had one who turned 19 and is on anti-androgens and estrogen, and neither of us believe, nor do the parents believe, who are very, very influential people in the county, that this child is actually trans. And so it's a tough one. It's really, really tough. And it, again, I think the best way to handle it is the way these parents are. Whatever you want to call yourself, whatever you want to do, it's all fine. No medical treatment yet. But now this particular client is leaving Kathy because Kathy won't write a letter saying, yes, you should receive testosterone and anti-androgens, or estrogen and anti-androgens. It's not quite as significant for those identified male at birth to receive those medications because for the most part they're reversible. Estrogen makes some changes that are not reversible, but for the most part reversible. Testosterone, I mean, it's making changes forever quickly. And that's the one that concerns me the most. And when we look at the 1,000 people who've detransitioned, about 20% of them, or I think it's closer to 30% of them, say, I'm really glad I went through all that, but I'm not transgender, and I'm glad I was not medicated. There's another, I think, 19% who say, I am trans, but the world is awful, and I don't have to live that way, so I'm not going to. The other, so 19 and 30 is, the other, 51% are saying, I'm really pissed that I was encouraged to do things when I really was a child that have a lifetime impact. And this particularly are those identified female at birth who find themselves with a very male voice. And so, we got to watch that stuff. On the other hand, you get somebody like me, it's hard for us right now because our group was trans 500 years ago and is going to be trans 500 years from now. I mean, throughout history, it's been about 0.5% of the population. And we don't know what causes it any better than we know what causes somebody to be gay. We do have some indicators that trans stuff actually happens in the second trimester of a pregnancy. The body is created in the end of the first trimester. Every fetus begins as a female. The end of the first trimester, half of them get an androgen wash, become a male. The brain does not make its connections to the body that's been created until the beginning of the third trimester. And there are a number of conditions, all of them unusual, where the brain does not make a connection to the body that's been created. Apotemnophilia is where you do not form a connection with a limb of your body. And so you see that limb of your body as a foreign object. And in a lot of European nations, they'll remove that healthy limb because of the person's psychological distress. And when they do, that person does not have a phantom limb as you or I would, because their brain has always said that's not there, not supposed to be there. And imagine how you would feel if you had a log sticking out of your chest your entire life. You would be saying to everybody all the time, this is not supposed to be here. And that's how they feel about an arm or a leg. And in the US, we won't do those surgeries. But we know that it's a short that developed in the brain, and we think that likely it's the same kind of thing with trans people. That something happened that in the third trimester it did not create connections to the body that was created. So when you have people, and there are a number of questions you can ask that help identify that, when people are able to answer those kinds of questions, about their childhood, again, that's a group you can treat very early. I think I would have been ready by 16 or so, and that would have been marvelous. But again, that's 0.5% of the population.
Get my exercise.
See, you don't run often enough.
This
John.
side should have a question next to. So, what are your thoughts on trans women athletes? I noticed that it's not a problem in the nation for the last 3 years where trans women athletes are winning swimming contests or playing women's volleyball. And so, what are your thoughts?
Yeah. You guys are just all wanting to get me in trouble today with the left. If puberty's taken place, you shouldn't be competing with cis females because you have an advantage. That's that. I have lost a ton of muscle mass. I'm a much slower runner than I used to be. I'm much slower mountain biking uphill than I used to be. I'm every bit as fast downhill because I'm 6'2". And also, there are differences in how, on the whole, differences in how males and females spatially understand things. Sounds, where we process sounds, how we process smell. Most trans women who identified early as trans actually, we know that they never processed odors as a male does, long before treatment, that they process odors in the ways, in the parts of the brain that a female does. All of that to say that on the whole, plenty of exceptions, but on the whole, males have a better sense of spatial awareness than females do. So if I'm mountain biking and I'm coming downhill, I apparently have a better sense of whether or not my pedals and feet can fit through that space than a cis female does. So I can probably hit that spot faster than they can. That's an advantage. And it doesn't roll the same way for trans men. I think it's fine for them to compete. But for trans women who've gone through puberty, and that's the key, then I think it's probably not something that needs to be happening. Yeah, let's only take controversial questions.
I have 5 more. No,
Here to question, love, and serve. That's us.
There you go. Oh no, I'm glad. I'm glad for these questions. I mean, that's an utterly, completely legitimate one. I spoke to all the mayors of the Front Range of Colorado back in January for their retreat, and that was one of the questions afterwards. And we've had a lot of conversations since then. Because I'm our version of vice mayor, I get to attend a lot of their events, and that's always something that comes up, because often, you're having to deal with this at the civic level. Other questions?
I have a question. Kind of a switch of gears a little bit because, I'm a spiritual leader. And I'm really interested in some of your thoughts around religion and spirituality. And in your book, you said something that I thought was just really an interesting perspective that I'd not heard before, that fundamentalist religions tend to be based in scarcity, which I thought was a really interesting take, and that they need an enemy to exist. So I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit more about that. Maybe why? Why is this small percentage of transgender folks the new big enemy? And what can a religion based in love do to counter that?
Actually, that's going to be in my next book. And the next book is When Their Enemy Is You, responding with an open mind, a receptive spirit, and a curious soul. So the first question is, why? Why is this happening? And E.O. Wilson, some of you may know Wilson's work. Edward O. Wilson, but went by E.O. Wilson, was a sociobiologist at Harvard and MIT. And he won 2 Pulitzer Prizes. First Pulitzer Prize was identifying the key social unit for the human species was not the nuclear family. It was the tribe. We're a tribal species. His second Pulitzer Prize was in identifying 9 tribal species. He called them all eusocial species, E-U-S-O-C-I-A-L. And he said these 9 have what Richard Dawkins would call a selfish gene, like every species does. But they also have a tribal gene. They will sacrifice themselves for the sake of their tribe. And 8 of the 9 have evolved exactly as you would expect. An enemy comes into the camp, they unite, they defeat the enemy, some members of the tribe die in the process, but the tribe survives, life goes on. The 9th eusocial species has, he says, very unfortunately evolved to believe an enemy is necessary for the tribe to survive. And where no natural enemy exists, they create one. And Wilson, before his death, said, we don't get a hold of this, we lose the species and we lose the planet as we know it. And the philosopher and anthropologist Rene Girard called this mimetic theory. And he discovered that those who were in power over the eons discovered the best way to stay in power was to identify enemies within the camp that only they had the power to eradicate. And therefore, you cannot turn me out of power because these enemies, you don't know where they are. I'm the only one who can get rid of them, so you should leave me in power so I can get rid of them. That's how scapegoats were created. And that's exactly what we have in today's world. Don't turn me out of power. I'm the only one who can identify the enemies, and these are the enemies. They will always be helpless groups that cannot fight on their own behalf, who most people have no idea who or what they are, so they can have a blank slate and create of them anything they want to create on them. And it's what we've done since the beginning of time. And the creation of enemies that do not exist. The best way, if you want a little more on that, a couple of years before he died, he did a Fresh Air segment with Terry Gross that's fantastic on it. And really, it's like an hour and a half. You get all of his stuff presented in a popular way that really works. So yeah, E.O. Wilson. Yep, sociobiologist at Harvard and MIT. Other questions? Sure. And I'll repeat the question, so you don't have to jump all over. Yeah, go ahead. No, just go ahead. Just go ahead.
That's all right. A little bit of, okay, I need to explain how I got here.
Okay, but if we can hold it to just maybe just a few.
I will.
Because,
I'll be
right.
brief.
Yeah, okay.
It's about relationships. It's about finding relationships when you're transgender. My daughter found somebody on Discord that was a homeless ketamine addict, and she allowed this person to move into our home. And my son who lives here did a background check on this person, and what he found horrified him. And he sent me a plane ticket and said, Mom, I want you out of there because this person is not somebody you should be around. And so it left my relationship with my daughter on tenterhooks for a bit. But I could not get along with this person. I could not live under the same roof with this person because they were being abusive and threatening to me. And my question to you is, how easy is it for people who are transgender to find healthy relationships when they're transgender?
Transgender people are people. And so when we're looking at trans folks, again, you've got to look at the individual. But we do know there are certain comorbidities. And ASD is one of the comorbidities of trans women, autism spectrum disorder. As a parent, you have a child who's on Discord, that's a red flag. You have a child in gaming culture, that's a red flag. You have a person in gaming culture who's trans, that's a red flag. So the young man who shot Charlie Kirk was a gamer, whose roommate was a gamer, also identified as trans. Pretty much you can figure out what's happened what's happening there. The person who identified as trans, my question will be, will they identify as trans 5 years from now, 7 years from now? A lot of folks with very significant ASD and very significant right brain deficits are identifying as trans. We don't know exactly what those connections are, but their EQ is very, very low. And so they tend to find themselves in unhealthy relationships. And we need to pay attention to that. And so, I mean, yeah, the first red flag there is Discord. It is a website that has a lot to do with the gaming culture. Gaming culture is a left brain heavy. The differences between the left and the right hemisphere. The left hemisphere says, I have a body. The right hemisphere says, I am a body. The left hemisphere is into categorization and analysis. The right hemisphere is in placing everything in context. The left hemisphere is more mechanical, mechanistic. The right hemisphere is more organic. The left is interested in what it knows. The right is interested in what it experiences. And from all those things, you would assume we're a left brain heavy species. We're not. The right hemisphere is the primary hemisphere. The left is its emissary. But for the last 500 years, we've been in a left brain heavy environment that rewards those with left brain capacity and right brain deficits. Ian McGilchrist, psychiatrist and a neuroscientist who taught, he's just now retired from Oxford, his book, The Master and His Emissary. Most people in the field of neuroscience say it will go down in the 21st century as the most important work of the 21st century. And he shows where a lot of the difficulties we have that play out in our culture today come from acting as if the left hemisphere is the primary, and when in reality the right hemisphere is the primary. It's a real simple example of what that means. It's a nice warm afternoon, you're out hiking, you forgot to take lunch with you, and you suddenly start smelling fruit, ripe fruit, peaches specifically, a lot of peaches. You're hungry, there's an orchard, a peach orchard nearby, you start walking in the direction of the orchard. That's your right hemisphere initially taking in information. But now you get to the orchard, you can't reach any of the peaches. So the right hemisphere says to the left hemisphere, figure out how to get those peaches. The left hemisphere is incredibly capable of focusing on just the 3 degrees in front of it to figure out how to grab stuff. But while it's figuring out how to get the peaches, the right hemisphere of the brain is looking at the other 357 degrees, making sure you're not eaten by a grizzly bear as you are reaching out to get the peaches. Now, that's how our species has gotten where we are today, this far along, both hemispheres working together. But now you're leaning against a tree, you're eating the peaches, you're thinking, peaches just don't taste like they used to. They're genetically modified. Oh, my grandmother's peach cobbler, oh my God, that was amazing. Oh, I miss my grandmother so much. That's actually all that information coming back into the right hemisphere and being placed in context. That's how we've worked as a species for eons, till 500 years ago. 500 years ago, think Rene Descartes, I think, therefore I am, left hemisphere. Isaac Newton, first person to see the world as a machine. Up to that point, had been seen organically. Again, left hemisphere heavy. Francis Bacon, we don't need God. We can set ourselves free from God through rational understanding. Spirituality, primarily right hemisphere. You get to the Enlightenment, that's really when it took off. And you get the Scottish philosopher John Locke. A rational God created a rational man who could understand a rational world in a rational way. Okay. And that's what we have rewarded. You know, when you were getting ready to go to college, did anybody tell you you really should major in art, music, literature? No, you were told there were no jobs there and there's no future there. You were told to focus on computer programming and higher forms of mathematics, things that are specifically left brain, because that's what our culture rewards. So the way it plays out is you end up then with a culture greatly rewarded, a lot of whom live here who say, oh, I can focus 3 degrees of my attention on creating social media. This will be great. This will be wonderful. This will be terrific. We won't have to actually be in the same room anymore. And we reward those people without actually rewarding and respecting the people who are asking the 357-degree question of, but is that good for us? Are we in fact not an incarnate species? Do we not need to be in the same room? Are we not in fact then creating a very lonely generation who do not have high EQ, who do not have the ability to show empathy with others and cannot place their lives in a greater context? That's what happens when we reward only left brain thinking. I mean, you could say the same thing with AI. I can create AI. It's terrific. It's wonderful. We'll solve all the world's problems with nobody with the power to do anything about it, to stop it. Asking that 357-degree right brain question of, yeah, but is it going to eat us? You know, even Stephen Hawking thought that was a legitimate question, and of course we've gone past that. We're not going to be able to stop it from happening. So if you look at the work of McGilchrist or John Vervaeke at University of Toronto, they really are showing if we cannot get back more balance the way we've been historically, right, left, back to right, we're going to be in deep trouble. And that actually also affects this entire topic. Also will be in my book. We probably need to finish.
Yeah, I have one, I think. One last question. And this is the one of your most famous quotes, so that I really just love. The call toward authenticity is sacred and holy and for the greater good. A lot of religion would say, right, that the holy path is to follow the correct theology, follow the correct rules. So can you talk just a little bit about how the call toward authenticity is holy and sacred?
So my perspective on the human ego is more of a Jungian perspective, not a Freudian perspective. The human ego is where we live at a conscious level. And the human ego is interested in just 2 things, power and safety. That's it. That's its only concern. It is a tyrant for power and safety. Beneath the human ego sits what Jung called the unconscious self. He called it the self. Every major religion in the history of mankind has called it the soul. And the soul, the unconscious self, is actually more in touch with reality than the conscious self. This is why your therapist is saying to you, what does your gut tell you? Because your body is more in touch with that unconscious, subconscious self. Or how do you feel about this? And the client will often answer and tell you what they think, and then you'll have to say to them, I did not ask what you think. I asked how you feel about this. Because again, your body is more in touch with that unconscious self. And that is the part of you that's more in touch with the truth of things, more in touch with God. It's Pascal, the heart has its reasons that reason does not know. And that is where that line came from. In my very first TED Talk, I kept losing, and I memorized all my talks, so I kept losing this place, and even in the rehearsal day, I didn't connect a really important part toward the end of the talk. And my coach, who's a head coach for TED, said, I don't think your transition sentence has enough gravitas. And I think that's why you keep forgetting it. Come up with a new one, I'll approve it. And I did about the middle of the night. And it was that line, the call toward authenticity is sacred and holy and for the greater good, which ended up becoming the most quoted line of the talk and is also the dedication line of my book. Because, and I did not forget it the next day. I think that is what's at the essence of trusting your own soul and listening to that quiet call. It's the hero's journey. All of us are called into the hero's journey. The question is, are you going to answer the call? And we're constantly called. I'm being called right now again, and I don't want to answer that call, and I'm 74 years old. And I want to say, God, I'm 74. Do I really have to answer another call into the hero's journey? And if we're alive, we'll be answering that call for all of our days. Yeah. Oh, that's just a really positive picture. Let me end with a poem. David Wagner. When you're lost in the forest, stand still. When you're lost in the forest, stand still. The trees ahead and bushes beside you are not lost. Wherever you are is called here. You must treat it as a powerful stranger, must ask its permission to know it and to be known by it. Listen, the forest breathes, it whispers, I have made this place around you. You may return to here. No two trees are the same to a raven. No two branches are the same to a wren. If what a tree or a branch does is lost on you, well, now, then you are surely lost. What do you do when you're lost in the forest? Stand still. The forest knows where you are. You must let it